Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, November 8th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 4 days, the game against Michigan in 18 days. The Ohio State men's basketball team opened their regular season with a 91-53 win over Robert Morris on Monday night. Justice Suing scored 20 points to lead the Buckeyes. Freshman forward Bryce Sensabaugh scored 17. All right, that's enough basketball. We're going to be talking football today. I was all set to do a show with interview clips from after the Northwestern game, and then I read something that our old buddy Bill Bender wrote at the Sporting News on Monday morning, and now we're going to be talking to him because his weekly bowl projection had some really interesting stuff in there involving Ohio State and Michigan. So, Bill, this is starting to feel like a year when we could have a really different kind of college football playoff field.
Well, it starts with Saturday night's events, obviously. We're not going to have Alabama. I'm sorry that there's no back door for them now with that second loss and 2 losses in SEC play and probably not getting to Atlanta. We're not going to have Clemson, I don't think. Now, and a one-loss ACC champion would probably be behind TCU and, the Pac-12, whoever comes out of there, and which leads to what we get to in the bowl projections, where this feels like a year. Could it be 2 SEC teams? Could it be 2 Big Ten teams? Or could it be 2 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams? And all of these scenarios are in play now based on Saturday's events. And, as far as Ohio State and Michigan go, it feels... Okay, so I think right now, it still doesn't feel as real and as huge to me as 2006 was. It feels bigger than 2016 was. And it'll probably be somewhere in between because it's not a winner-take-all. It's a winner-take-all scenario with a potential backdoor plan.
Yeah, this is definitely, I probably, you live in suburban Columbus. I don't need to tell you, the people have been talking about that game for weeks already. There's still 2 more weeks to go before it's Michigan week, and that's all pretty much anyone wants to talk about. So that's what we're talking about a bunch on these shows, too. I guess before we get too far down the path, let's at least run through what you are actually projecting here, because we'll all have a link to your article in the post for this on the front page of Buckeye Huddle. I'll tweet it out as well when I tweet out the link to the show. But, what are you projecting here? Is that a projection of what you think will happen if games play out the way you think they will? Or is that where you would have teams if the season ended right now?
No, this is more of a projection what I think is going to happen over the next few weeks. So, in theory, TCU wins out, under this projection. Under this theory, they don't do the 2 SEC team plan. Now, Tennessee's going to finish 11-1, I think. But here's my argument for the Michigan-Ohio State thing over that. Now, Tennessee's also going to be out of sight, out of mind for the next 3 weeks. They're playing Missouri. They're playing Vanderbilt. They're playing South Carolina. These are all games that they're going to win, but we saw what happened Saturday. The offense up against a 5-star roster, a 5-star defense looked very ordinary. Whereas Ohio State and Michigan have been in the top 4 all year. They have 2 contrasting styles. There's the potential for them to play a game that's something like 06 or 16, and I think if that happens, the loser would be considered for a playoff berth, and the winner would probably go on and beat whichever dart lands out of the Big Ten West in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and that suddenly is a little more of a question now that Illinois has lost to Michigan State. It is no one wants to go to Indianapolis. It seems like all Illinois had to do was just win that game, and they were pretty much in. And then no, not yet. So, all right, let's run through the Final Four, the college football playoff field as you have it right now. Obviously, subject to change every week moving forward. But how did you have the 1-4 and 2-3 matchups lining up in the college football playoff field?
Well, if it plays out the way that I think it will, you'd get that second Big Ten team would be Michigan, and they would be a 4 seed, and they would play Georgia, who I don't think is going to lose, I think. And then the other matchup would be Ohio State and TCU. And in that event, you would have 2 schools that TCU, I know they played a couple years ago, but TCU their fans still haven't forgotten about 2014. My Twitter timeline can tell you that as soon as I tweet these out, that they still have a back and forth with Ohio State about that. I think the Horned Frogs are being disrespected, not as far as Ohio State goes, but in general. They had one of the best Octobers you can have. They beat 4 ranked teams. They've won their last 3 games by double digits. They've got a good quarterback, a good system. And for all that, they're a 7-point underdog this weekend against Texas. So I do think it's a school that's being a little bit disrespected in the rankings.
Well, and they were behind Alabama in the first rankings too. That was one of the few things that I looked at and kind of went, "Ooh, boy, they're not going to like that." That was something that jumped out to me. And I think there was certainly an argument. Alabama, TCU, who would win if they play heads up? Well, now there's not much of an argument. Alabama pretty clearly, like you said earlier, out of the picture. TCU very much in it. If they can beat Texas, this is a team that absolutely could make the field. The question, I think, the real question there, with that rundown of teams and Michigan being fourth and Tennessee being fifth, I'm sure everyone who is listening to this is going, "Oh yeah, sure, they'll leave an SEC team out for a Big Ten team." I will believe that when I see it and not a moment sooner. So, how do you see the argument for that? Tennessee does have a win over Alabama in that scenario, and Michigan, in this scenario, Michigan would not have a win over Ohio State, but they have a win over Penn State. How do you see that argument for 4 or 5 there potentially getting decided?
Well, I mean, Tennessee may win that argument. They may very win that. Based on what? I mean, they've piled up some wins against ranked teams. I think Michigan would have a harder time winning that argument than Ohio State would. Let's say Michigan would beat Ohio State, and Ohio State's sitting there with 1 loss. I think Ohio State wins that argument with Tennessee based on reputation, based on they've been in the top 2 all year. Their roster stacks up comparably. And they have nice win. That Notre Dame win is starting to look better now, especially after the way that they treated that Notre Dame wins stock has fluctuated throughout the season. Let's just put it that way. But right now it looks pretty good. I think they would win that argument. Now, Michigan, would they win that argument? Again, I think some of it depends on how they would look in Columbus. That's part of the benefit of the doubt. If they go to Columbus and it's a game like 16 where it goes into double overtime, and we were asking ourselves after that game, why can't both of these teams be back in the playoff? I think it could happen. They're the 2 Big Ten brands that can overpower a second SEC team as long as it's not Alabama.
Yeah, it does feel like if that's a 1-score game in Columbus, that you very well might get 2 teams. And, this is the point of the year when everyone always wants to throw out the crazy scenarios. And is this the year that 3 SEC teams get in? That was last year. This time last year, people were talking about 3 SEC teams getting in. And it never actually seemed to happen. But, after that Clemson loss, Alabama loses a second game. It sure does feel like 2 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams is not just possible, but maybe even likely if TCU loses at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does, because TCU would have a chance. TCU's probably gone if they lose. I mean, just based off the disrespect they're feeling already. The Pac-12 could cancel itself. Utah could basically ruin the Pac-12 with a team that has 2 losses and I think is a very good football team. Could get Oregon knocked out, could get USC knocked out, could get UCLA knocked out. So, they all could just cannibalize each other over the next 3 weeks. And then that would leave a scenario to me where you're picking between an ACC champion and Tennessee. I think Tennessee is going to win that argument. If we got Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Michigan in the playoff, I wouldn't be surprised. Because, again, I think those are the 4 teams that have been in the top 4 most of the year. Those are the 4 teams that have taken care of their business. Those are the 4 teams, when you watch them, you're like, they have the least wrong with them. Tennessee's got this super exciting offensive scheme, and I know it didn't look good against Georgia, but Georgia was ready for them. Georgia's I've thought all along, and I think I've said this on the show a few times, is I think Georgia and Ohio State are the 2 best teams in the country. I've thought that all year, but I think Michigan, there's a conversation now between them and Ohio State. There's probably a larger conversation than there was maybe in August. I think it's going to be a heck of a football game. I would still favor the Buckeyes at home. But it's not going to, I don't think it'll come as easy as, say, 18 and 19 when this thing wasn't even close. So I think they're going to have a war, and it's going to be a fun game.
Yeah, it does. This does feel like an Ohio State-Michigan game with a level of anticipation, season-long anticipation that we haven't seen for quite a while now, which is, I mean, that's fun. That's how this is supposed to be. I'm sure it was better for Ohio State fans' blood pressure when they were beating Michigan by 3 touchdowns every year. But this is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be championship stakes on the line for both teams and all that kind of stuff. So I'm for it. I don't know. We'll see how everyone else holds up through the next 3 weeks or so. But should be a fun one. What is to you, looking at the rankings right now, what is the team that is the furthest down the initial college football playoff rankings? We're going to get new ones on Tuesday night. But from the initial rankings, I think Ohio State was 14th or something in the initial rankings in 2014, and then they made it into the field. What is the team with the lowest ranking that you think at least has a plausible path to making the final field? I'm looking at LSU at number 10 and thinking if some really crazy stuff happens, maybe. But who would you think it is that has at least a plausible path to making it?
Where was North Carolina ranked in the first set?
12th or 13th, I think. They were lower than LSU.
They're the one that I would say, because if they win the ACC, and I posed this question to somebody today, I said, if North Carolina and TCU played tomorrow, who you got? I was like, you got 45-42?
I was going to say, I've got the over.
Yeah, you've got 45-42. They have a really good offense. Their loss against Notre Dame isn't as bad as, it's funny, Notre Dame's going to get tossed around a lot in the room, even though they're not even close to the playoff. They're going to be mentioned with Ohio State. They're going to be mentioned with North Carolina. They're going to be mentioned with USC when they play USC. And they've got an offense. They've got a quarterback in Drake May who has comparable totals to C.J. Stroud and Hendon Hooker. They have all of those things working. They've won a bunch of close games. I think they could win the ACC and finish 12-1. Will that be enough? They would need the Pac-12 to implode. They would need the Big 12 to implode. They'd probably need Ohio State or Michigan to beat the other one by a bunch of points. And then at that point, they'd have a chance. So I think they're the lowest one-loss team that I've got to look at, that with the things going in their favor in that offense, Drake May will capture attention. You watch him play. He's a future first-round pick. There's no doubt there.
Yeah, and Drake May, for people who, if you have not been following UNC closely, that is also a name you might know from Ohio State's recruiting in the past. That was someone that Ryan Day had taken a real serious look at a couple of years ago. And he had decommitted from Alabama and ended up committing to UNC. And has the Tar Heels. I think everyone just kind of wrote the Tar Heels off right at the beginning of the year. I know I did. When they gave up 60 whatever points to Appalachian State and lost to UNC, lost to Notre Dame, and you kind of went, all right, well then they're done. And then here they are, still alive. Look at the guy with the chainsaw coming out of the mist behind you. Like, wait, where did this guy come from? Finally, we need to. You do not just project the playoff; you project all of the bowl games. Let's talk about the most important, really, really big story in those projections. Bill, the Ohio Bobcats are bowl eligible. Your wonderful alma mater down in Athens slotted to play Michigan State in the Quick Lane Bowl. Confession time, I did not think this team was going anywhere this season. Apparently, you can just outscore shaky defense in the MAC this year.
Yeah, they've had a lot of wild games and a lot of high-scoring games, and they are bowl eligible, which is a pleasant surprise. I have them in the Quick Lane Bowl against Michigan State and Mel Tucker. Well, at least the Spartans got there, right? And that would be a fun test for them. A fun way to get back into the postseason. We have 6 MACs. The thing about MACtion and watching it, it's a little bit different than breaking everything else for me. Why it's a nice break is everybody's pretty close in the MAC. There isn't that, and it's kind of like watching that high school conference with a bunch of teams that are about the same. And it's fun to watch for me. I'll continue to watch MACtion throughout the week as they do the next set of college football playoff rankings, and very excited that the Bobcats are going to be going bowling this year.
Yeah, Battle of the Bricks tonight at Miami, then at Ball State next Tuesday. Finally, they wrap up at home against Bowling Green. Speaking of teams, I did not have pegged to be in the MAC championship race at this point of the season. Okay, Bill, they have the tiebreaker if they win out, because they already beat Buffalo, who's one of the other one-loss teams in the division. They would theoretically beat BG as well. Can the Bobcats win out and go to the MAC title game this year? What do you think?
All they have to do is beat BG. That's going to be a fun game, too. BG certainly always has been improving. BG was a mess a few years ago, and now they've improved, and they got a little bit of offense. That's a big game down in Peden here in a few weeks. If they win that one, they'll be in Detroit, and we'll see who they get, and trying to break that streak that dates all the way back to 1968. It'd finally be nice to go win one.
Yeah, I thought for sure Frank Solich was going to do it. It was like every year, is this the year Frank Solich did it? And it never quite happened. Boy, I did not have year two of the Tim Albin experience as the year that it could happen, but boy, it still could happen. So more than just Ohio State and Michigan and more than just college football playoff to watch. Please enjoy the whole sport. It is a fantastic sport. And yeah, a little action tonight. We will have our college football playoff rankings live show at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle coming up tonight at 7 o'clock. Bill, let people know where they can find you and where they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm at BillBender92 on Twitter. You can read all our stuff at Sporting News. We'll have plenty of Week 11 analysis from tonight's college football playoff rankings, and it'll be a lot of fun. We're in that home stretch, and like you said, before you know it, I know it's Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh are never going to say, well, we're looking ahead to this game, but us as writers, it's okay to take a peek ahead because we're allowed. We don't have to focus on the next opponent as much as the players do, but I do think we're going to get there, and it's going to be a fantastic November 26th.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to anyone. Right about the time Ohio State took a multi-score lead at Penn State, it was like, all right, it's Michigan week, basically. Yep. So, yeah, there's a game at Maryland that might be a little interesting in a couple weeks. But yeah, it is going to be quite a fun month around Columbus and the whole state of Ohio and the whole state of Michigan. It is the best month of the college football season. So glad we can all enjoy it together. So, Bill, thank you for joining me. Thank you guys all for joining us today. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.